You're listening to the Drummer Daily Podcast, the only daily podcast dedicated just to drummers. Go to my website at danielhadaway.com. Hey guys, it's Daniel. Welcome to another episode of Drummer Daily. You may notice that I actually did have a front bumper on this podcast now. And that's funny because I think just yesterday I mentioned that I don't do that because it's too much trouble. Well, I found a way to do it quickly and add it to every episode, so you're now stuck with hearing me talk about myself before I jump on and myself start talking. That's confusing. Anyway, as promised today, I want to share something with you that's a little more practical than what I've been sharing maybe in the past few episodes. I mean, everything is practical, but I mean more something specific to drumming versus just any other kind of, principle or idea. So today we're going to talk about what I think is one of the biggest enemies of playing with a click, for sure. Even without a click, it's something that's kind of built into a lot of us, and it kind of ruins groove when trying to make things feel good. And the thing is this, it is flams. So a lot of us, myself included, grew up in band, orchestra, marching band, and whenever you play the snare drum or other kinds of assorted drumming instruments, you always were pretty much every time that you bring your hands down together on the drum. So kind of visualize this with me. You have your hands out and you're going to bring both hands down on the drum, so both sticks down on the drum at the same time. Well, if you're playing a snare drum or like I said, other kinds of upright banging on them instruments, you are always going to be playing, when those two hands come down, a flam, where, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's where you hit a small hit. So both hands come down together, but one hand, the first hand that hits, is going to be a little bit before the hand that actually hits right on the beat. So if I'm bringing down a flam on beat 1, and it's a right hand flam, my right hand is going to hit on beat 1, but my left hand, my left stick, is going to hit right before beat 1. So it kind of goes, kind of a little, they call it a flam. It's a little sound where it's kind of more than one hit at the same time. Well, that's all well and good if you're playing, snare drum in a marching band or orchestra stuff. But for me over time, what happened was I played snare for a couple of years in marching band and did a lot of orchestra stuff. What happened was I developed a habit of playing flams. If both hands are coming down together, I'm playing a flam. Well, that's all fine until you start playing drum set. And if you have a habit of playing flams, like I still do, what happens is you take your right and your left hand, and they're going to be coming down together, but instead of having them come down together on one drum, you move that right hand, if you're right-handed, over to the hi-hat, and you keep your left hand on the snare drum. Now, if you bring both hands down together and you play that same flam that's a habit that you've always had, what's going to happen is that right hand might come down right on the beat on the hi-hat, but your left hand that's on the snare, you have muscle memory of playing a flam, and so what happens is your left hand ends up being a little, rushed. So if you bring both hands down together, if you're listening and somewhere private and aren't getting embarrassed, do this with me. Put both hands in the air and pretend like you're bringing them down on the hi-hat and the snare. What's going to happen is, if you're like me, you have the habit of playing flams, your left hand is actually going to rush the beat a little bit, and your right hand's going to hit right on the beat. So if you're just grooving along playing without thinking about it, you might be flamming every single time on the hi-hat and the snare and not realizing it or just not thinking about it because it just feels natural. And the way you can notice this is if you ever record yourself and listen back, it'll start to kind of feel a little weird. That's why. So I actually, I've mentioned before, I'm working on this boot camp for drummers, Boom Click Boot Camp. There's one whole kind of segment where we work on this exercise to actually figure it out. And what you do is you actually move back to putting both sticks on the snare drum. And what you basically do is you attempt to bring both sticks down exactly at the same time on the snare. And if you do this exercise right, what happens is you end up doing what, at least in my marching band, we called popping the snare, which is both hands come down at the same time on the drum, And it's kind of like when you have two people jumping on a trampoline and you happen to land right at the same time, and kind of like the shock wave of both of you landing at the same time offsets the other one, and neither of you go anywhere. Neither of you bounce. You kind of offset each other's. You cancel each other's momentum out. Well, on a drum, if you do this, if you get it just right, it feels really weird and it sounds terrible. But for our purposes, we're actually going to try this on purpose to get the habit of actually doing that whenever we choose to. So what I want you to do is I want you to sit down with a drum or a practice pad. It actually works better with a drum though, because you get the reaction of the drum head. And just literally take both hands and start trying to hit both hands exactly at the same time on the snare drum. And try not to flam them. And like I said, you'll know if you do it right because it will sound terrible and it'll feel really weird. But start doing that, and then if you can work through that and do that a little bit every day, start thinking about doing that same, how that feels, start doing that same thing with the snare and the hi-hat when you move back over to playing actual rhythms. And then of course you can also incorporate the same thing with your kick drum and your hi-hat hands. But there's some more ideas behind that we'll talk about another day. The idea of accents always being rushed because you're moving your hand faster to hit harder. Things like that you can work on. And of course, once you develop the ability to hit both hands at the same time on purpose, you have to make sure you don't make just a habit of that, because there are times when flams are actually very useful. So you don't want to lose the ability to play a flam. You want to be able to control when and when you don't actually do that. So I hope that's a practical tip you can actually apply today. Thanks for listening to this. Let me know what you think. By sending me an email, daniel@danielhadaway.com. I read and reply to every email I get, and I won't say that once I stop being able to do that, but I haven't gotten enough emails yet to where I feel like I can't. So send me an email, let me know what you think about this, and I will have another practical tip for you tomorrow. But until then, thanks for listening so much, and I will talk to you again soon.